Spring and summer bring a symphony of color to Oklahoma pastures and roadsides in the form of native wildflowers. Although there is a wide variety to enjoy, one has a little more significance than the rest. The Indian blanket, the state's official wildflower. Also known as the fire wheel, the Indian blanket became Oklahoma's official wildflower on March 20, 1986, when then Governor George Nye signed the measure into law. The idea to make the Indian blanket the state's official wildflower first blossomed with an educator with strong ties to Ada, Oklahoma. And it was an Ada lawmaker who helped bring the idea to full bloom.
I had just been elected to the state senate, and Dr. Doyle McCoy, who had been teaching at East Central, formerly at Ada High School, as a science, biology, botany teacher, came to me and said, "Billy, please, we need a state wildflower that we can plant and grow and have so that we can look at it. The mistletoe is a floral emblem, but it really is not something that we can cultivate." And of course, he was a wildflower enthusiast. And I said, "Well, okay, Dr. McCoy." And we talked about how we might do that, and it was beautiful. Dr. McCoy actually lobbied every senator and every House member. Kelly Haney carried the bill in the House, and I carried the bill in the Senate, and it passed, of course, with flying colors.
Dr. McCoy chose a wildflower he felt best exemplified the state of Oklahoma. The colorful Indian blanket is a prairie species that blooms in a south to north pattern between Mexico and Canada. It first appears around Mother's Day, and as long as weather patterns cooperate, lingers through September.
Being the botanist that he was, he looked at several, and of course it was his choice. I mean, he was the one that decided that was really the beautiful one. And of course, the fact that Oklahoma is the seat for the 5 civilized tribes just made it even more symbolic that it be used, because its colors embrace the bright Indian colors that are used in many of the dresses and costumes of the American Indian. I wish that Dr. McCoy were still living so that he could be here, because, you know, he's written several books concerning wildflowers, and he was just a great enthusiast for promoting beauty along our roads and highways and in our yards.
The Indian blanket represents a simple pleasure to behold, but is actually a very complicated wildflower. As with so many of Mother Nature's creations, there's so much more than meets the eye.
Members of the daisy family, or the Asteraceae, they're not just a flower. They are a collection or a head of flowers. So there'll be hundreds of flowers grouped together as one attractive or pollinating unit. And all members of the daisy family do this. So here is a small internal flower that makes up the bulk of the flower, and out on the edge are the ones with the big petals that make up the more attractive aspect of the flower. The Indian blanket, that is the native wildflower, is an annual flower. So that means it germinates, it grows, it flowers, it sets seeds, and dies in one growing season.
First cataloged by a French naturalist as Gaillardia pulchella, the wildflower grows in bunches, creating a blanketing effect in open fields and any place else it has room to take root. Although it self-seeds, the Indian blanket is also a favorite of bees, which help it to cross-pollinate and propagate in large numbers.
You have the yellow tips on the flower that grade into the darker, what we see red, but the bee then sees as UV, which the best we can perceive that, it's dark. And so it makes a bullseye and says, "Come have lunch here, come have dinner, we've got lots of food for you." So if you're a bee and you're visiting this flower, you get a whole lot of flowers to choose from, a whole lot of sources of nectar as opposed to one. It's like going to a buffet as opposed to going and getting just a hamburger at a place. If you look at the literature on the indigenous uses of the Indian blanket, the Kiowas used it as decoration and it indicated good luck. But the Indian blanket is in a group of members of the Asteraceae of the daisy family that produce sesquiterpene lactones, which is a chemical that can be toxic.
Another locally abundant wildflower with a similar name sometimes creates confusion among casual admirers. The Indian paintbrush, while also beautiful, is very different in appearance from the Indian blanket.
I think it's the name that causes the confusion. You have an I and a B in two words. And the Indian paintbrush tends to start flowering earlier, but then it can overlap in time, so you can find them very close together, and that may be part of the confusion.
The paintbrush is a little bit, it is a sort of a orangish, reddish. It's a different color completely. And I believe the paintbrush already had a state. That it was already taken when that was another reason that the paintbrush wasn't chosen. And also, it's very difficult. You cannot gather the paintbrush and grow it, bring it to your yard and grow it like you can the blanket.
When Senator Floyd worked to make it the state wildflower in 1986, being high school students helped by providing every member of the state Senate and state House with a potted Indian blanket. Because of the political nature of passing a measure of any kind, there was a little resistance.
There were one or two that were just so concerned that the mistletoe had been around since early statehood days, and the reason it was chosen as the floral emblem was it was the only thing they could find in the Oklahoma countryside to decorate graves with year-round, but it certainly is not something that one can cultivate. And there were one or two senators that had to give me a bad time about what we were doing to Oklahoma history, but we're not competing with mistletoe being the floral emblem. We're saying that the Indian blanket is the wildflower to represent the state of Oklahoma. And of course in the spring, this time of year, early May, and you see them growing all the way from the Red River to the Kansas border.
Although the Indian blanket was named the state wildflower in 1986, Oklahoma did not have an official state flower until 2004, when the Oklahoma rose was selected. While many states share different varieties of the rose as a state flower, only Oklahoma can officially claim the Indian blanket. In fact, even the stained glass found inside the state capitol dome reflects the rich reds and yellows of the little wildflower. Over time, the Indian blanket has proven to be an excellent choice.
It really is indicative of this part of the nation, and it's an easily recognizable one. That's part of what makes Indian blanket a good state wildflower. I think it's a good one because it's pretty.
George and I were in college together. We were at East Central together, so we were school chums at one time. And it was rather interesting. George and I said to me is, let me tell you something. He said, all they'll ever remember me for is passing the state song, Oklahoma. And he said, all they'll ever remember you for is you carried the bill for the state wildflower.